Day after a loss, not the exact finish to a 3-game in 8-day stretch that we wanted, right, Santi?
Right. We had a good run of flyover fallouts without a loss.
Yeah, I was almost glad that we didn't get together at 8 a.m. the day after that LAFC match. I
Oh,
thought about
yeah,
it.
yeah, me too. Me too,
I
for
woke up.
sure.
I woke up for work and getting the kids ready on Thursday, and I knew we had a pod that night. But I got up and I was like, it feels weird to not be talking City at 8 a.m. on the day after a match day,
Right, right.
for better or for worse. Uh, it's funny. The fact that we had a 6:30 game, I I felt it gave me a little bit more time last night to digest things and to kind
Mm-hmm.
of relook things over. So like I went and noticed some things about Edu's positioning and performance when he came in, as much as you can take from the fact that we were down 2 and 3-1 by the time he came in, and then just looking at the differences in some of these stats from previous games. It almost reminds me of that Seattle game last year. You remember that one where it was like one of the first losses we had last year, and Seattle
Yeah.
threw a 3 in the back or 5 in the back with wing backs at us, and we just collapsed when it came to producing chances and opportunities. That's
Mm-hmm.
what this felt like to me. Maybe that's something we should compare actually when we start recording, because Carnell has a good quote to start us off here. But anyway, um, yeah, same. I've got the same notes and stuff, so we'll go in the starting 11. I got a bunch of stuff on game flow notes, but we don't need to spend a lot of time with that. And then some of the passing network stuff, some of the defensive actions. It's kind of notable.
Yeah, yeah. I was looking at the passing network because I wanted to see Klaus's position. 'Cause I felt like
You
at
can't see his
times
number. You can't see his
I
number on it.
know. I was like, "Is that him?" I
It's
had to
him.
I had to count the circles to make sure that was him.
It's him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
Klaus is basically like covered up, but I was also looking at Sam in because I had a comment at the very beginning of the game, and it was like third or fourth minute, and I was like, oh, that ball to Sam, that's what we need to be doing. Like if we're gonna look at getting Sam in position, I'm fine if you want to draw everybody back and send him on 1v1. Let's do more of that. And he didn't have a single shot after that.
yeah, that was great, but I think obviously sometimes he can like shoot out of nowhere and create a good shot, but
He can out of nowhere.
yeah, but I think he just went for it just because Klaus and AC weren't even
Right.
close. So
He had no other option, and
yeah,
he wasn't gonna hold up the ball. That's just not what Sam does.
yeah. So he's so quick that it took a while for
Mm.
Klaus and AC to get there, but
Well, you ready to record this one?
let's do it.
All right. Welcome in everyone to Flyover Footy. My name is Matt Baker, joined as always by my friend in soccer, Santiago Beltran, for another Flyover Footy's Fallout. This week, we look at the 3-1 loss. St. Louis City traveled to Cincinnati and couldn't quite get the job done in just about every phase, let's be honest. But we're going to recap it all here, and let's start off like we usually do with our starting 11. Before we get into that, I want to give a quick shout out to, just like Bradley Carnell did post-game, the FC Cincinnati organization. Santi, I'm sure you saw it. They had their white armbands being worn with an IL for Ilona Lowen, who obviously we know is battling brain cancer, and it's weighing heavy on the hearts and minds of not just the club, obviously Edu and Ilona's family, but fans. And it's been a Bradley Carnell reference. Has been a heavy week, and I think that's important to note as we call this out and have that hanging over Edu and the team, and as they look to progress through the season, knowing that Edu's going through that. It's been an insightful week in our minds as fans, having understood that now and what Edu and the team has known for quite a while. So as we get into the starting 11, this was a very rotated lineup, right, Santi? I counted 7 changes from our last match, but Bradley Carnell had a slightly different look at it. And I think this speaks to his looking at the next man up mentality, who's been seeing minutes overall in the last few games. Bradley Carnell's quote on this starting 11 before I list it is, I look at it as Watts, Dewar come in, Jose comes in. That's 3 changes to the constant lineup we've been having. I feel less critical than maybe you, referring to Tom Timmerman, who asked the question,
Hmm.
in who we put out there, but I think he was speaking for the fan base. Carnell goes on to say, guys had been training well. This is what we stand by, and we thought that this team in that shape to have a go at it. We had many good turnovers in the first half. A couple of guys run out of steam, lose the edge. It's understandable, and then we make changes. It's important for this group. Guys have opportunities, and those opportunities will be evaluated. So 2-3 big changes maybe. And those 2-3 big changes ended up looking like Roman Berkey in net. The back line was Nicholas Dewar, Kyle Hebert, Joachim Nilsson, and Akil Watts. Jabulu Blom and Jose Kojima in the midfield. Celio Pompeu, AZ Jackson, Sam Adeniran, and Joao Klaus up top. Whether that looked like a 4-2-3-1, 4-4-2, depending on offense or defense, it's all debatable. But the takeaways for me, Kojima's first start in MLS. That's fantastic. I think this was Akil Watts' first appearance this year. But whether Carnell wants to say it's 7 changes or 2 or 3 big changes from who's been playing meaningful minutes, it was definitely a different look for St. Louis City, offensively and defensively for me.
Yeah, different look if you compare it to the last 2 games. But at the end, as Carnell said, some of these guys have been playing, had minutes, and it was the notable ones were Watts, Nicolas Dur, and Kijima. And
Mm-hmm.
about Nicolas Dur, we were talking earlier yesterday and during the week, and also based on Carnell's remarks during the press conference, we weren't sure if he was going to start. We didn't
Right.
have him on our consensus starting 11, and then we get the surprise and he starts, but he only lasted the first 45 minutes.
And our consensus had a lot of debate in this because we were trying to look at making sure we didn't have too defensive minded of a fullback coupling. So looking at probably Kyle Hebert and Jake Nerwinski wasn't going to be a good match. Looking at Thomas Totland wasn't going to play. We had that in our minds. And so if you had what ended up having actually lined up with what we thought. So Akil Watts on the right, definitely an attacking minded. We know he's a push forward kind of a guy in his two-way, in addition to his defending for a two-way player. But Nicholas Dewar ended up being much more of a defensive minded fullback in this game. And when I asked Bradley Carnell about that post game, he really did reference how he reiterated how Nicholas Dewar is still getting acclimated, not just to the culture, but the system. And I think that was the biggest thing to me. It wasn't necessarily he's here and it's the off the field stuff, but it's really the on the field and what we're asking our fullbacks to do. And I noticed that when I went back and looked at it, that Nicholas Dewar didn't push as high as I would say Anthony Marcanic had been used to. And I think that was it may have been intentional based on how the overall flow and system output was for St. Louis City, which was a lot more, I would say, in their own zone, so to speak. And so Bradley Carnell saying Nicholas Dewar has, that learning and we're going to move him along in probably his positioning and what they ask him to do in progressing the ball, I would say. That was the focus on what Nicholas Dewar has to learn. So in the end, I think it lined up well with how we thought the overall approach would be, with more attacking on the right, defending on the left. You had Jose Kojima slide in the midfield, which I think Jose Kojima had earned this based on the flashes that we've seen in his time with City 2. That was a good opportunity for him to get a nice run out. And playing alongside Jabula Blom, who had his first start in quite a while. I think his first start in a month and a half at least, when he started with Chris Durkin at one point. But there was a lot to like about the individual moments that a lot of these players had. It's just didn't feel like they could really put it together as a system or connecting with each other.
Yeah, and the beginning of the game, it was good. City like had the ball in Cincinnati's half, just some half chances, but I was pleased with what I was seeing, and then all of the sudden, Cincinnati creates that moment around the 23rd, 24 minute, and ends up in that PK, and I think after that the game was a different game.
Yeah, before that, it was a lot of back and forth. I mean, you had some early flashes of brilliance from St. Louis City. Like we talked before we started recording, that our early chance to Sam Adeniran around 3 or 4 minutes, that was a kind of a nice moment where you're saying they're going to involve Sam. They're getting him involved in the offense. This is how you can send the ball up to him and let him go 1v1 in an open space. He didn't have a good angle on it, but it was good to see that he was free and open and able to take that 1v1. You also had Cincinnati working some pretty good transitions after they were doing a lot of the things that I think we talked about on Flyover Footy last week, where they would possess the ball in their defensive half, maybe up to or around midfield, a little bit before, a little bit after, but then they would just turn it on. They would turn on the jets and they would get going in transition, and they wouldn't let St. Louis get set beyond there. And for a team like St. Louis who keeps a high line, that's dangerous. We saw it early and we saw it often where they were trying to get some of these overloads in transition. They were absolutely working to get Lucho Acosta involved in some 1v1s. Carnell said after the game that FC Cincinnati's built in some ways like a counterattacking team. Not much time to take too many touches. They have to use those windows wisely or be comfortable breaking them down. And St. Louis overall didn't do a great job of that later on in the game, but I do feel early, before the Lucho PK, before that opportunity around 23, 24 minutes, St. Louis was doing a fairly good job in preventing FC Cincinnati from getting into good positions to take quality shots. They were getting into the final third with these transitions, but you were having some good defensive moments from Akil Watts. He had some really good defensive moments. And then also, I would say the spacing was not bad with Nicholas Dewar, Kyle Hebert, and Joachim Nilsson. And that's adding Jabulu Blom to that, who we know is a defensive-minded center defensive mid. And then coupled with that, I thought there were some fun moments for City before that goal. It wasn't all doom and gloom. You had Salio doing some good dribbling. He drew a foul near the top of the penalty box, putting City in good position for a free kick around 16, where I was just clamoring, this is the opportunity. We need Edu Leuven in the game, because this is picture perfect Edu Leuven goal right here. And
Yeah,
that's not to say, Santi, that the others can't do it. Like, I know Salio didn't have a great free kick there, but we have other good free kick takers. This is Edu Leuven's bread and butter right here.
yeah. When he created that foul, I was like, who's gonna take this one? And I went back to last game. AC had one, and
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't successful. So I was like, okay, let's see what Celio can do, and
Yeah.
same result. But yeah, in those moments is when you miss Edo Leuven.
Yeah, and that moment was a good moment. It wasn't quality chance from the free kick, but some other moments that I thought it was a really nice moment to see Jabulu Blom have some on the ball work. I was very impressed around 21 minutes when he had the ball in his defensive half and he just dribbled himself out of pressure. So this is an opportunity to see individual skill, if not stringing together passes to break pressure. And it ended up at some point later in the game, he had a turnover on a similar play, but it was nice to see this individual moment reminding us that Jabulu Blom is a fantastic ball handler and he can get out of pressure at that pivot, at that number 6 role, which is what you need when you have a team like FC Cincinnati who doesn't necessarily high press, but they have intentional pressure on the ball whenever St. Louis has it. And the way that they had their press was beaten at times by this kind of individual skill that St. Louis had. And then it all kind of just started to fall apart. At 23-24, this was a goal where I had to go back and I looked at each goal multiple times, because if you look at the goal and how it was scored, it doesn't tell anywhere near the full story of any of the three and how they really developed. So with this first one, I think it's kind of unfortunate who we're going to have to target and spotlight here as one of the reasons for the goal, but maybe it also speaks to a lot of that individual flashes of brilliance or individual attempts being the thing that didn't work well for City and led to a lot of these issues, because when you're not stringing passes together and progressing the ball through to each other, you're trying to do too much as an individual. And so this first goal, or at least this first foul in the box, started with St. Louis City possessing the ball on the left wing in their attacking third. It was Celio Pompeu. He had the ball with a couple players in his face. He tried dribbling out of it, but then he ended up dribbling himself into a literal circle before the ball was poked away and Cincinnati was off and running. Nobodo played it to Acosta. Acosta held it, and you had a little tiki-taka back to Nobodo over to Yuya Kubo in the midfield. And when Kubo had the ball in the midfield, he laid it off to Gerardo Valenzuela, who was legitimately off and running, dribbling 30 yards at least into space, into the City attacking half. As City starts falling all the way back, nobody's challenging him in space. He's just continuing to progress the ball in that carry. And as Valenzuela reached around 25 yards out, Celio Pompeu, if you watch this highlight, it was him who was marking Lucho in the run on City's left side. Lucho definitely makes some space for himself, but it was Celio who drops centrally. And I have a question in my notes. He was blocking something, because I can't really figure it out, because there were 3 other City players in that vicinity. And so when Celio falls in more centrally, it leaves Lucho into open space. And so with all of that, all those defenders clogged up right there, Lucho finds space to receive the pass. And once he receives the pass, has a quick stutter move to beat Salio, who then has to immediately fall back to Lucho. And by the time Lucho gets just past Salio, Salio has to put a hand on him, an arm. He touches him. There's clearly contact, no matter how soft it was. And Acosta goes down at the perfect opportunity to make it look like, and the referee had the viewpoint watching the play from the other side. So I just have a tough time being too hard on the ref for this. A soft foul, a foul, whatever it is, you have to call that as a penalty when Salio puts an arm on Lucho like that, right?
Yeah, it was a foul for sure. Slight contact, but it is a foul. I was thinking about it this morning, and I think it was against DC United, if I'm not mistaken, when Celio was fouled in the box for that PK that tied the game. It was similar,
Mm-hmm.
very slight contact, but it is a PK. No matter how you look at it, and yeah, Lucho solved it well too. But yeah, I don't see the referee at fault there. The one thing I wanted to mention, Matt, on the recap of that play, after after Celio lost the ball and it went to Acosta, City had a chance to recover it, and
Yeah.
I think there was some confusion because Dewar, Celio, and Nilsson were on the ball, and I think there was some confusion because Nilsson had a very short touch, and it went back to Cincinnati.
Yeah.
So I think right there is when you see the consequences of having a rotated lineup. Guys are not familiar with each other in a game situation. Yeah, maybe they do that during training, but there was a chance to recover that ball, and in the end, just didn't work out. But I went back and looked at the replay this morning too. A few times, and I was like, "Wow, we had three guys around the ball and couldn't clear it."
That's a good shout because in the aftermath of that, a lot of people were looking at where was Nicholas Dewar during this, and why was Joachim Nilsson so high up, and what were the issues outside of Salio? Because Salio, you can kind of draw a straight line to the problem with that play, but when you're in transition like that, and it's Salio's responsibility, who had just lost the ball so high on the left, and it's Salio who's defending Lucho so deep on the left, you look at to where the other players were, and so that kind of answers the question of where was Nicholas Dewar, where was Joachim Nilsson. They were trying to recover the ball. They were still working in possession when they were beaten, and the transition just escaped them because of how high up they were, still trying to play in that possession or recover the ball.
Yeah, yeah, but in the end, Cincinnati, it's a very dangerous team, and when you give Lucho Acosta some space, he can be dangerous. And yeah, Celio was trying to stop him, but in the end, just had that slight touch that resulted in the PK.
Jose Kojima spoke to his post game and spoke to that point of how quality Lucho Acosta was, saying he thought they did a good job suppressing Acosta early and credited him for the type of player that he is, but then noted that he had to foul him a couple of times to keep him from doing more, including when Jose Kojima received his yellow card right there at that tackle at 35, where in the moment I saw a lot of fans said he got the ball and he shouldn't have been carded. I thought it was either too close to call, and Acosta had enough space in front of him to where this was seen as obviously taking away an opportunity. Kojima really didn't seem like he had too much of an issue with that. He noted that he had to foul him. I thought it was a good foul, if nothing else, because there was space
Hmm.
for days ahead of him. That was going to be a dangerous opportunity around 35 minutes if Kojima didn't make that tackle. And as soon as he did that, I immediately thought of his IQ in that situational awareness, because Kojima, we know, is one of the smartest minds on the team, and how he's so studious. And this was clearly in the moment good move for him. And I thought, other than that goal in the first half, Roman Berkey had a great save around 30 minutes that's not going to go on the score sheet because it was an offside call. But that was how the story was in this first half. It was just that moment, and then it was an even matchup more so than anything else. You look at the stats at the end of the first half, and it really wasn't that bad for City. I mean, in comparison to where Cincy was. So City had a problem creating chances where they just had 0.36 expected goals, 0 expected goals on target because they didn't have a shot on target. But Cincinnati wasn't markedly better. They had 0.14 expected goals in open play on 5 shots. St. Louis only had their 2 shots and 0.25 expected goals in open play. So those open play XGs are pretty similar. The opportunities in quality were pretty similar for both teams. It was the moment that Lucho was able to win that 1v1, win the foul. That was the biggest difference. It was a 0.79 XG on that penalty shot. And that was the difference. The passes were Cincinnati controlling the ball in their defensive half, not anything that we weren't expecting. So this game played a pretty similar back and forth that we thought we were going to see in the first half. It was just that one PK moment. But then as we go into the second half, it was quick subs made, almost like it was either prescribed or you knew that Carnell saw something that he wanted to change. We weren't being as efficient in those connections. And so you look at the two of the 3 players that Carnell mentioned as not having had minutes lately and were, in his eyes, true rotations, Kajima and Dewar. So he takes them out. He puts in Ostrak and Parker. So you move Kyle Hebert, as we speculated before the game,
Yeah.
over to left back. What did you make of this sub at halftime? And did you have this confidence that putting Ostrak in the midfield and having Parker, Nilsson, and Hebert as part of that back line would make a difference?
Yeah, as you mentioned, it wasn't a bad half, and yeah, I think it was more. I was surprised because Kijima and Nicolas Dur were the new guys in the lineup, and they had not played a lot in this stretch of 3 games in 8 days. But yeah, Carnell must have seen something, and Parker going in and pairing with Nilsson, which is the center back
Mm-hmm.
pairing everybody has been wanting to see, and obviously Ostrak for that element on the attacking that he can go forward, and he has improved defensively a lot. So yeah, I saw it as good substitutions. The one thing, and this could be just coincidence, but LAFC game, we made a change in the back line at half, and then LA scored within the first 15 minutes of the half. And then this
Mm.
time around, also changed the back line, and very early on the half, Cincinnati scores. And as I'm saying, it could be just a coincidence, but backline was working against LA the first half. Same thing. It was working okay against Cincinnati on the first half this time, and then when we made changes, we allowed goals. So it could be just a coincidence, but it could also be that when you made those massive changes at half, maybe it takes some time for the guys to communicate well and know where the other guy is. But yeah, just a comment there.
I mean, it's a perfect analysis because you can't help but draw those parallels to how quickly those goals were scored. And it doesn't matter how the goal was scored in that regard because you had that similarity to LAFC. But in this case, right after halftime, 49 minutes, Yuya Kubo, it was another Cincinnati possessing opportunity. And they were just past midfield this time, and then they had the transition just past midfield up to the end line where Pavel Bucha came back to the ball for Cincy in midfield, and he played it as that holding type midfielder, playing it off to their left wing extremely quickly to Luca Oriano. And Akil Watts missed the tackle. Yeah. So Oriano was able to get near the end line after beating Akil Watts, where he sent the cross in. And this was the flashpoint of this play. The second goal from Cincinnati is when Oriano gets this cross in. Tim Parker heads it out. But as Tim Parker is heading it out, you have other defenders crashing the box. You have Joachim Nilsson along with Parker and Jabulu Blom all collapse on goal to try and prevent that cross from landing, which was good. I mean, that there's no problem I have with defenders crashing the box to clear a cross. Problem was the cross was cleared to Lucho Acosta right outside the box.
Yeah.
And when the ball was cleared out, you have defenders who now have collapsed on goal. So they've created space in the box between where Acosta was, and you have your midfielders now having to try and Thomas Ostrak, for instance, you have to try and create that gap in space or block that gap in space. And when you have your defenders collapse, what happened was all of Parker, Nilsson, and Blom were rushing to get into position, and Kyle Hebert had taken it as his role at left back to step up to Lucho Acosta. And when Hebert stepped up to face Acosta, you had Celio Pompeu, who was trying to block that wing area, right? you had Brett Halsey out there in their right back role. And
Mm-hmm.
so you have your three defenders, Parker, Nilsson, and Blom, who had collapsed on goal. You had Kyle Hebert step up, and you had Salio out on the wing. So there's this huge gap of space that Kubo was working in. Lucho Acosta was drawing Hebert towards him, and that's where the gap existed. Salio didn't cheat towards Kubo, he cheated towards Halsey. And
Mm-hmm.
when you had that space, I mean, Lucho Acosta, he found it. He's going to find that space every single time. And he slipped the ball into Kubo, and it was too much space at that point from where Parker was, still back, still trying to get back into position, to where Kubo was. And Kubo used that space to score the goal.
Yeah, it was just a lot of chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Parker and Nilsson trying to get back in position. Just looking at the replay, you see Parker and Nilsson just around the PK spot, and yeah, Celio chose to cover Halsey, and then Kubo just was there by himself to just put it away. But yeah, it just shows when you give Cincinnati and Lucho Acosta a space, they are difficult to stop, and it's also a big blow to allow a goal so early on the second half after you have played a good half, even though you were down 1-0.
Yeah, so after that goal, uh, the best chance the City had created so far happened to me. Around 51 minutes, it was kind of a good transition moment, actually. Tomas Ostrak was stretching the field. He had the ball at midfield, and he had this really beautiful pass, long to Sam. And this is where you had the AZ missed shot just outside the box on his left foot, or rather, blocked shot. But Ostrak stretched the field to Sam, and then Sam played it off to AZ. But there just wasn't any bite. AZ played the ball a little bit outside the box himself, and then when he cut back, he had space, and I really thought he was going to slide it in the bottom corner past Roman Celentano, but
Hmm.
it wasn't to be. And this was one of two shots that AZ had in the second half that actually had a high percentage chance of going in. It was 0.2 XG or greater. This one was around 0.2. This one was 0.18, so right there at that 0.2 mark. But it was a 0.38 expected goals on target because of the location that he was able to slide it into, that bottom left. And we know that expected goals on target is just XG, which is the spacing, the area that you shoot from, and the quality of where you're positioning yourself, plus where you put the ball on target. So it's a really quality ball on target, but it didn't have the bite, didn't have the pace to it that would beat Roman Celentano. AZ also had a nice opportunity in that diving header that he had around 71 minutes, which was just missing the timing. And that's one of those moments that I have a tough time faulting AZ because, like Bradley Carnell had said, and I think it was Tim Parker might have said, or maybe Klaus. I forget at this point. It melds together, but it's such a fast paced moment. The
Hmm.
takeaway from that is I have to remember that this is a player in transition. It's a millisecond that he has to try and position himself, and to even get a touch on a diving header like that at 71 was pretty remarkable to be able to do. He just didn't have that perfect timing quality to put it in the net to try and pull one back for St. Louis. But these two chances by AZ, those were the best chances we had, 51 and 71. Beyond that, we had to rely on Matt Miazga, the guy who was suspended for delivering pizzas into the referee's locker room last season's playoffs. The ball was in the FCC zone around 54 minutes. We had pressure from Sam Adeniran going to Roman Celentano, going to the defensive line. Matt Miazga just had the ball and put way too much pace on a back pass to Roman Celentano, and it just went in. A good pressure by St. Louis to force that mistake, but I mean, it was just an absolutely terrible pass by Matt Miazga.
Yeah, terrible pass and miscommunication with Celentano too, because you can see him like signaling to pass the ball to I think it was to Murphy on the left, and he just decided to pass it back to Celentano, who was out of position. And
Yep.
but at that point, I was like, "Oh, this is great! City is back in the game." Even though there was an early goal scored by Cincinnati, now it's back to one goal difference, and that will be good. And we have a game now.
It changed it. Yeah, it changed what St. Louis needed to do because if you're down 1 versus 2, you have a lot more realistic opportunity. You don't need that consistent the consistent opportunities. You can have a moment land and suddenly you're good to steal a point. But between subbing in Indy and Durkin for Salio and Blom, you had an opportunity where this was the most frustrating moment for me in around the 64th minute. You had Cincinnati, who had been possessing the ball. St. Louis did a fantastic defensive job around 64. Cincinnati ended up having two men on the ground in St. Louis's defensive half. City starts building and ended up giving the ball away from an AZ Jackson errant pass looking for Indy at the top of the box. And it was clearly a forced pass. This was for as much as I liked AZ getting in position to have those two shot opportunities where, yeah, the quality wasn't there on the shots that I mentioned at 51 and 71. Here at 64, this was just a bad decision. And I think that if they had taken a little more time, and this may be a theme, if you just take a little more time, have a little more patience, and have a little bit more awareness in where your players are, you're not going to try to force things. He tried to force a pass to Indy at the top of the
Mm-hmm.
box. It wasn't close. And this was probably the best opportunity St. Louis had in the second half, where you had numbers. Had you just been a little patient, those two players were not getting up. One was in the box, one was on their right side of midfield. So you would have had numbers. And they couldn't have the patience to get it done. They tried to go to what they were used to. The situational awareness of you would have numbers otherwise wasn't there. So I don't want to belabor the point, but that was frustrating for me. And then FC Cincinnati brings in what would end up being a game changer in Sergio Santos at 67, along with Yamil Assad. Both ended up having roles in what would happen after. Roman Berkey, more amazing saves, 72 and 77. I mean, fingertip saves, right hand. There were 3 goals allowed, so that's the national narrative is that Berkey allowed 3 goals, but it would have been 5 or 6 if we had an average goalkeeper in that position.
Yeah, when the game was 2-1, he had three amazing saves
Yeah.
to keep City in the game.
Yeah, and that can't go overlooked because all of this is happening with just one goal down, and it's keeping St. Louis in the game. Everything I just talked about needing to have just one moment land in a one goal game is massively different than being 2 goals down and needing to have continuous pressure and trying to chase multiple goals. Berkey kept us in that. This is the player of the game without a doubt for St. Louis, Roman Berkey, because you can't look to anybody else. He kept us in the game for most of the game, massive stretches up until about 80 minutes. But the moment of the game came at 74, where it had nothing to do with on the ball play. It was Edu Lowen finally making his return appearance for St. Louis City for the first time since the Austin FC game, I believe. It was a feel-good moment that we'd all been looking forward to. We expected him to get a little bit of a run out. He ended up with 15 to 20 after the stoppage time. And we got to see him coalesce with this team that through the subs ended up looking like a pretty top tier St. Louis City side by the end of the game. So when Lowen entered, he was entering with a lot of St. Louis's best. You know, Thomas Totland notwithstanding, Anthony Marcanic notwithstanding, but you had a lot of those pieces that Lowen can play around. So it offered a little bit of an insight into how Lowen is going to slot back into this team. And I watched a few times. I was watching moments after the game to see where he slotted in, and it was a little chaotic. They were obviously down 2-1, so
Mm-hmm.
you were playing a little different than you would at an even game. But it was very clear to me Edu Lowen was sliding back in at the 8. He was the central midfielder next to Chris Durkin, and his role was what it was last year as the engine, that midfielder who goes box to box, and he had opportunities he was creating for others as well as putting pressure in the midfield on the defensive side. When he subbed in, it moved Thomas Ostrak up higher. And so you had it was a little bit of a different look because, like I said, they were chasing a goal. Indiana Vasilev was more of a left wing back,
Mm-hmm.
and you had AZ Jackson over there on the right side. But Ostrak moving up is the key to me. When Lowen comes in, what's he going to do with Ostrak in play? Slots back into his spot. And so this isn't a question of are we going to see Ostrak in at the 8 and Lowen play at the 10? Absolutely not in my book. I think if you look to where Eddie Leuven's going to play as he gets his fitness back and where he's going to slot in into the ideal St. Louis starting 11, it's the 8 central midfield right next to Chris Durkin.
Yeah, and you could also, if you have that combination of Leuven and Ostrak, you can also exchange those two during
Yes.
games and have flexibility. So yeah, it's great to see Edu back after all the issues, not only injury but personal issues. It was great to see him back, and as you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, class act by Cincinnati
Mm-hmm.
by doing what they did. But it's great to see this. To me, it's more like the person. He's a great human being and he's going through a tough time, and I think back on the field. is massive for him too. And yeah, it's gonna take a while for him to get back into soccer form, but eventually he will be a big contributor to the team.
Unfortunately, he didn't have a lot of time to really chase that goal and equalizer because at 80 minutes, Sergio Santos put it away. He made it 3-1 for Cincinnati. And this was another time where Cincinnati was possessing and had a quick transition moment into their final third. They played the ball from right to left. It landed with recent sub Yamil Assad to the left wing at the 18-yard box. Assad was quick passing off and on the ball, creating a lot of that space on the left wing and channel areas between Yamil Assad, Lucho Acosta, and Luca Oriano. It ends with Lucho Acosta having the ball into the penalty box where he's beating Chris Durkin. Durkin can't find that tackle, just a bit late, and Durkin chooses not to challenge him the way Celio did earlier.
Right.
Didn't foul, so Acosta dribbles it in, and he gets into the tightest of spaces and finds that perfect pass on the floor behind the defensive line, finds Sergio Santos far post where not even a diving Indiana Vassilev can stop him. There were two notable things about this goal to me. One is the fact that the XG of this goal was higher than Lucho Acosta's PK that he took. It was like a 0.88, 0.85, something like that. And Acosta's PK was a 0.79. So the positioning that Acosta was able to put this ball in to find Sergio Santos was almost a gimme. And that's massive for what St. Louis allowed. But why did St. Louis allow it? How did they put themselves in position to let Lucho Acosta beat them once again? And I put this into miscommunication territory because if you watch the replay, you'll notice that in that transition where Assad is taking the ball on the left side and they actually start their transition into the final third, we're finding Lucho Acosta on the left. Watch Kyle Hebert. Kyle Hebert's in the box. And as he's moving across the box, he has this hand gesture that he's basically telling, I think, Joachim Nilsson, but potentially Indiana Vassilev, who's back there as well, like I mentioned, playing a left wing role late in the game, to cover his area because Kyle Hebert moves way inside centrally, almost to the right channel in covering, looks like Lucho Acosta, like he's trying to mark Lucho Acosta to an extent. And he obviously can't go all the way over, but he puts himself so far inside out of that left back position that hand gesture to me was his indication that he needs somebody else to cover.
Yeah.
I don't know if that wasn't well received or if it was received and Sergio Santos just found space and beat them because they were so occupied with Lucho Acosta and what he was doing, but they were chasing the pass, they were chasing the ball, and they weren't focused off the ball just like they had been before, and Sergio Santos was able to beat them on this.
Yeah, and aside from that miscommunication, it was a great play by Cincinnati, like quick touches, short, and just putting city's defenders out of position, and yeah, then you give that Lucho Acosta gets that space, and he's just a great player. City did a good job containing him for a, a big portion of the game, but when you give moments to a player like him, a goal and two assists last night, and he was last year's MVP. If it wasn't for what Messi is doing, I think Lucho Acosta could be the MVP this year too. So it'll be an interesting race to watch. But yeah, at that point, the game was over.
So at this point, too, I look internally to St. Louis City. Everything we've talked about highlights a couple of things on individual skill level. So from the very beginning of this match, looking at Sam Adeniran's 1v1 on through to the chances AZ had into the defensive areas in marking some players, there was a lot of, and then this is probably one of the biggest conversations post game is individual skill level. I know the fan base is at this point in time saying, because this game's also coming on the heels of the salary information being released by the MLSPA. And so you see the roster spend by St. Louis at 12.05, lowest in the league. You see this kind of a result. You've played 2 games in a row against a Denny Bwanga-led LAFC and a Lucho Acosta-led FCC. And you think, we have a good team, but we have nobody to take us to that next level. We don't have a single player who can take this game and own it, whether it's pulling us back in or putting us in the lead, like we've seen Denny Bwanga and Lucho Acosta do in both delivering service to others as well as scoring goals. So that's where I think the narrative is driving right now. You've got a couple bad losses. You have the salary cap information, and you have the rumors of Marco Royce. I'm working on a streak here where I make sure to drop Marco Royce's name in at least every single podcast we do until he signs with the team one way or another. It's my Beetlejuice of things. Anyway, I look at how this expected threats were post game in the stats. I look at the passing network, and I see that this was not just a team that was a little timid in their attack, because the passing network shows that we were much more focused in our defensive half, but the expected threats were nowhere near where we've seen them before against teams of marginal quality, of worse quality. So this gut check time facing this quality team like FC Cincinnati showed that you have Indiana Vasilev, who had the highest expected threat from his passes, and he was a second half sub. You had Klaus with a negative XT from passes. I don't know if you see that at the very bottom of that stat.
Oh wow, I missed that.
Yeah,
Now, yeah,
he goes the
yeah.
opposite way in what his threat was from passes. This is a team that had nobody to really take control of the game when we needed somebody to have that quality. AZ Jackson had the opportunity a couple times, but couldn't find those individual moments of brilliance. That's why Marco Royce is so appealing in that regard, because he is that player, regardless of his age right now. When he's healthy and he's on the field, he's that player who takes over and changes the game. Maybe we see more of that with Edu Lowen, because I think it's still, we forget right now just how good of a player he is on the ball as well as on set pieces. So he's another player that I think, when you talk about individual levels of brilliance, just wait till Leuven's fully fit and plays 90 minutes again, because he, while not at that Marco Royce level, I'm not trying to make that analogy, he's a player who is the best player St. Louis City has in the run of play of their outfield players.
Yeah, we just have to wait and see what this next transfer window brings. But I agree. The team needs a playmaker, and Billy Jensen just made a comment here.
Yep.
He said the blueprint is in Ohio. Acosta and Cucho are game changers for their medium market teams, and yeah, I totally agree. And whether it's Marco Royce or someone else, I think help is needed in the summer transfer window.
And Cedric Tuckert's still out there. Like, we're not going to go too deep into potential targets, but Cedric Tuckert is the realistic option. I said it last night that if you're looking to the summer for St. Louis needs to open the pocketbooks and spend money on players, Cedric Tuckert's the realistic option because he's on a free and his salary is in that TAM range. Marco Royce is the stretch. He's that ambitious goal of yours that you really don't think is realistic and in reach, but man, if you really open the pocketbooks and if you train hard, you could really find him. It's one of those things where I don't see us signing him realistically, but he's the stretch goal. Cedric Tuckert could be that difference maker in a second striker scenario, the true replacement for Nico Gioacchini, if anything else, who we still haven't replaced his 10-goal output with. And so where do we go from here? Looking at how this St. Louis team performed against FC Cincinnati, I hesitate to have too many takeaways into their on-field performance, because I asked Bradley Carnell last night. I asked him, I noticed that the wing play was lacking. And whether you attribute it to Nicholas Dewar or Akil Watson for Thomas Totland, we weren't progressing the ball through the wings anywhere near like we did in prior games. And if I thought about it a few more minutes, I probably would have come to this conclusion as well. But Bradley Carnell definitely said that, yeah, that's by design. Cincinnati runs a back five. They have wing backs. They run a deep line back there. We were never going to get anywhere on our wings like we usually do against a back four. He said, so it was never part of the game plan to continue what they'd been doing against back fours, to progress the ball through their wings. And if you look through these passes into the final third, where usually we have 50+% of our passes into the final third come from the left side, this game, it was 28% to the left, 31 to the center, and 41 to the right. It was much more even to try to break down their mid block is what they were really throwing at us, but their deep line that was very wide. And so that's what St. Louis was. That's why I think before we recorded, I likened this to Seattle from last year, who did the same kind of back five, and St. Louis had extreme difficulty in creating chances around that. So that's something I think, in all of the evolutions of St. Louis City to this year, when you're talking about the system and how the team is playing and progressing and creating chances, whether they're quality or not, I look to how they're handling a back five as potentially that next roadblock. How often it comes around, I don't know. I'd have to look at the defensive structures of the teams we're playing. It's probably not that many times, but it's definitely notable that we're continuing to have problems with the back five because of our bread and butter, which is the wing play.
Yeah, and it's amazing to see that passes into final third chart because there have been other games where the play through the middle has been 10% or less, and this time it was 31%, very significant. But yeah, not a lot of teams play with that back five, but that doesn't mean that other teams will look at this game and say, oh, okay, so this is how we stop St. Louis. So that's just another thing to consider. If you when you rely so much on the wings, teams can change their defensive structure and just play a different way, so you don't play through the wings.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of takeaways from this other than those. It's continued struggles putting on high quality shots on goal, squandering those few moments we create. Individual skill is the easy thing to point to, where you're relying on individual players to do things themselves against potentially 1v2, 1v3 situations in creating their own space. Sometimes it works. Like Salio's had success with that in the past with his ball handling skills and his incredible high level dribbles. But then you have moments like AZ in the second half where he gets a relatively weak shot off, even though he created a little bit of space. And it seems frenetic instead of understanding the moment of you have an advantage with players down and you can take an extra moment to try and find that quality in your passes and pick apart the defense that you have numbers on. Uh, I look to that as one of my takeaways in support, I guess, of finding new players to sign that are high quality or just improving the level of who we have to feel confident. Because I think we've seen some flashes of skill at that level from players all across the board. AZ, Indy, definitely Salio this year, Klaus and Sam for sure. But whether it's the confidence or the consistency to trust them in those moments, I don't think anybody has that right now.
Yeah, there are flashes at points of different games, but I agree with some of the people that are here on the chat. We need a playmaker and somebody that can make the difference, and then you have all these players around this playmaker, and then you have a good thing going. So yeah, it'll be an interesting transfer window whether Marco Royce comes, which um, I'm not sure if City's gonna be able to pull that one off, but yeah, playmaker is needed. And just looking yesterday at Cincinnati's lineup,
Mm-hmm.
Kevin Kelsey came in the second half, 19-year-old
Yep.
from Venezuela, and he's on loan right now. But Cincinnati is one of those teams that quietly they spend money to bring quality players. So that could be a good footprint for City. And yeah, they're a medium market team. A lot of times arguments are made about, oh, the big players just want to go to Los Angeles or Miami. But there is a niche, a market for teams like City, and I think Cincinnati and Columbus Crew are a good footprint for that.
And St. Louis has all the intangibles. So as we look to wrap this one up, I think there's definitely a narrative right now that St. Louis is appearing cheap because of the low roster spend, the quality we've had in the past couple of days. So it's a recency bias in a lot of ways because
Hmm.
before this run of games, it was a positive outlook. You know, we had beaten up on Chicago. We were continuing to fight our way into games to maintain draws. And it was a game where we were at the upper echelon of the Western Conference teams. Just 2 games ago, we were 2 points out of a fourth place spot. So this is definitely recency bias in a ways to me, but if we don't stop the bleeding here, it's going to be a trend that we probably can't survive or at least reach a possible top 4 finish, which we know this team is capable of. And a lot of that does go into, is the ownership willing to spend on players to bring in this summer? And the easy defense that I've made, and I'm definitely guilty of this, but I'm not. It's valid to an extent. Is we're in our second year and we've privately financed everything that we have. This ownership has spent money to put this team where it is right now. We just need to now spend a little money on the player side. You know, we can't rely on developing players, selling them, and using those profits to reinvest into the player pool exclusively. You know, if we don't kickstart ourselves in a certain way, then we're going to potentially be in this issue for a couple of years until we can sell some more players and earn profits to then reinvest into the player pool. Yeah, that extra little jolt from Nico and Como getting promoted, that's nice. You know, the up to $2 million. It's not a full 2 million, but that that may go into our ability to reinvest into a Cedric Tukert or possibly a Marco Royce type of a player. We'll have to wait and see into what the impact to that is. But this jolt is needed, I think, to find another high quality playmaker that fits the overall bill. And Lutz, we know, has shown a penchant to look to Europe more than South America, and there's a big calling for opening up the scouting and opening up who he's looking at overall and who he brings in. I think Benitez is a good opportunity for a longer term vision with City 2 in coming from Colombia, but right now it's looking to these next few games. It's looking to Seattle. It's looking to Miami. It's a tough stretch based on how the Sounders have started to round in a little bit to form. I think there's an opportunity next week. Then we have Miami. So it's a rocky stretch right now that St. Louis is going through after not able to find at least a point against LAFC midweek. Going forward, where the St. Louis is funny enough, we haven't dropped from the
I know.
standings. I was watching the Seattle game last night, and at one point Seattle was up 1-0, and we had dropped to 10th. And so you can see the decline. We're holding on by a thread to that last playoff spot here in the middle of May. And so as we finish this rough stretch of 2 games and we look to go to Seattle, or we look to welcome Seattle next week, we are still 9th in the West. It's a bad loss against FC Cincinnati, but this team has an opportunity to right the ship for a Seattle team that is far from steady like Cincinnati. This has not been the Seattle Sounder powerhouse team of old. And so we're going to preview them later this week, but they dropped 2 points after being in a winning position against Vancouver. They remain 2 points behind City. So it's a battle of 9th and 10th next week. St. Louis still sits on 16 points now with a 3-3-7 record, still searching for that first away win. And we may have to wait a little while since Miami is our next away opponent. But we've now gone negative in the goal differential. That's unfortunate, and definitely something noteworthy is we're at -1 on the goal differential for the first time all year, where we return home next week to play Seattle Sounders, who have won 3 of their last 5. This is a team in better form, not nearly as good as FC Cincinnati, but still at home with St. Louis, with having come off the heels of FC Cincinnati, knowing how Seattle plays with their possession-oriented game and their good passing. I think this is an opportunity to take what you've learned from FC Cincinnati, harken back to what you saw from Seattle last year, and apply that this coming week. So any final thoughts from you, Santi, on FCC or St. Louis going into this week?
Just a big game coming up against Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
Seattle had a rocky start to the season, but as you mentioned, they have won 3 of their last 5 and dropped points yesterday. But knowing that City is on 9 positions, Seattle on 10th, it's an important game, and I will label this game as a must-win game on Saturday. And yeah, there will be more about it when we do the podcast on Thursday. But I think this is a game you have to win, especially considering then you're going to Miami.
You heard it here first, folks. Santiago Beltran naming the Seattle Sounders game as a must-win, just like we both named the Chicago Fire as a must-win. This would not only stem the bleeding, but it would make sure that we are not at risk for 4 losses in a row, which would, I think, be devastating to the fan base. And we're already seeing cracks in how the fan base is viewing things. It's the next evolution in the wrong way from all the draws we had earlier to now seeing 2 games with 2 high-level players pick apart City in various ways. So we'll be back midweek to look at how St. Louis started their training this week. Hopefully to hear from Bradley Carnell as well. And we're definitely going to be back next Thursday for our live stream and a preview for Seattle Sounders to see how that game's going to match up. It's going to be a very fascinating look and a very important, very, very important matchup for St. Louis to right the ship before going beyond that to a very difficult away match in Miami. Santi, thanks for joining me on Flyover Fallout. Everybody in the live chat and listening on the podcast, thank you so much for watching and listening. We really appreciate it. We are sponsored, as always, by Noble Ice Vineyards for the 2024 season, and we look forward to being with you multiple times a week, every week for the rest of the season. Thanks again for watching and listening, and we will talk to you later.